Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. Hope you guys are doing well and had a nice weekend. But it's Monday, February the 8th, and it's about 12:52 p.m. So in around 8 minutes, we'll get our meeting going. Nice to see those that are here, and as usual, just get comfortable and feel free to say hello or anything else if you want in the chat, and we'll get rolling in just a little bit. Hi, Chelsea. Good to see you. Hi, Noah. Peachy says hi. She's been really sweet this morning, so looks like she wants to chill. Peachy. Peachy. Hi, Edward. How's it going? Hey, Danny. Just entertaining Peachy for a minute before class. Peachy. Want it? Peachy. Go. Hi, Dylan. Good to see you, too. Good question. Textbook online. Well, I know that there are copies of it that are available through online retailers like Amazon, and I believe that Chegg.com that sometimes offers rental options has a pretty affordable option to rent or purchase. So those might be some places to think about if you didn't find it easily through like the bookstore or just through McGraw-Hill. So yeah, you have a number of different options, I guess, that I would throw a couple of those out there. But it's not it's no shortage of supply. It's definitely out there. So if you have any like issues trying to locate a copy, let me know through email and we can probably work something out. But yeah, I think you'll find it through Campus Bookstore, Amazon, Chegg, and retailers like those. Hi, Diane and Brenda, Tahani, everybody. Good to see you guys. Hope you had a good weekend, Super Bowl weekend. I don't know if anyone was watching the game or, rooting for either team, but it was, it's always fun to see the big game. It wasn't exactly the most competitive, I guess, this year. But once again, Tom Brady, I guess he's one of the greats at this point. Hi, John. Cool. So another 4 minutes until it's class time. Hey, Nick. Good to see you. Hey there, Stacy. Hello. Hi, Ivani. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class. Gladys. Hi, Ashley, Micah, Blake. Hey there, Jay, and hello, Amanda. Couple minutes, guys. There's Sunny, Emily, Nancy. Thank you, guys. Hey, Margarita. How's it going? And Alexa, nice. Good to see you. Hey, Jennifer and Dimitri. Hello, Diego. Hi, Megan. Hey, Mick. Ray. Critical Thinking Cruz. Always good to see you guys. Hi, Danny. Okay, well, let me just bring us into the meeting. And hi, Kenya. Good to see you too. So it's 1 o'clock. Now it's class time, so I'll just go ahead and let us get underway. Thank you guys for being here again. And as I was saying just a few minutes ago, hope you had a great weekend. Enjoy the Super Bowl if you're a fan or if you're just checking in. I know it's a big game for most Americans. So, yeah. Let's see. For me, this weekend is kind of interesting. On Saturday, I was a judge for the National High School Ethics Bowl competition. So I guess I was a referee in a different type of bowl competition on Saturday. Yeah, so that was like different high schools from all around. They organize a team and they have a coach, and they basically evaluate and present ethical issues and debates. And I'm supposed to be a judge who asks them questions and then scores their responses versus the other team. So that was kind of fun, a nice little academic exercise that I was put onto through one of my colleagues at Chapman University. So yeah, it was an interesting little experience helping, some young high school kids get a little bit of experience with philosophy and moral reasoning. But anyway, yeah, welcome back, guys. I'm glad that we're all here again. So today the plan is that we're just going to continue following through our syllabus, and I'm going to give you guys some good notes on chapter 1. To this point, we pretty much have talked a lot about the basic concept of what is an argument and what is deductive validity, inductive strength, what is soundness, what are some different types of deductively valid argument. So the last lecture on Wednesday last week, it was really focused on that. So like what is a hypothetical syllogism and what are the 3 different kinds? What is the disjunctive syllogism and how does that argument look on the page? So I kind of want to just begin today with a quick review of those matters from last Wednesday about different forms of deductively valid argument. And then we'll kind of continue from here and start talking about material in chapter 1. So as I think I've said before, if you haven't yet been able to just contribute just a little greetings to the chat. Please do that just because it's my informal attendance record. So I want to make sure that you get your your attendance recorded. Therefore, if you haven't yet said hello or hi or good afternoon or just anything at all, make sure to tap in and put a little comment, and I'll use that if ever necessary to verify attendance for purposes later. And as I've said, again, if you have a different screen name than your official name in my roster, please note it in the live chat. Okay, guys, great. So let's just go back a step and review the last lecture. We started by talking about how good critical thinkers don't believe things unless they're based on good arguments, and they can present good arguments to defend themselves, unlike bad critical thinkers who believe things for no good reason, things that are not based on good arguments. They'll still believe it, and they don't have the ability to defend their views with argument. Argument, set of 2 or more sentences where there's one conclusion and at least one premise. Conclusion, where you're trying to prove to be true. Premises, reasons that are given as evidence to support the conclusion. We talked about how truth, the whole point is to convince, persuade, show that the conclusion is true. Truth is when whatever the sentence says matches the facts of reality, so it's factual and accurate to the facts. We talked about different types of sentences, conclusion, premise, indicator words, and then we talked about deduction and induction. So with deduction, a good deductive argument is called deductively valid, meaning that if all the premises are true, then the conclusion has to be true as well. There's a slight difference between validity and soundness. Soundness is having a valid argument, but where the premises are, in fact, all true. So you can have the valid argument that's not sound. Like if I say to you that all human beings were born in Kansas, and I don't know, Tom Brady is a human being, and therefore he was born in Kansas. The argument checks out in terms of validity because the conclusion is just a statement that is a logical result from the above premises. But in this case, it's not sound due to the fact that the first premise says all humans were born in Kansas, which we know isn't correct. But if it were correct, consider the hypothetical where it's correct, and the second premise, assuming it to be true. Given those premises, the conclusion follows logically. So that's deductively valid, but not sound. Valid and sound, I don't know. All humans are mammals. Tom Brady is a human, therefore he's a mammal. Just, those are 2 statements of fact, and they do imply the conclusion. So it's valid plus sound. Now, induction. An inductively good argument is called inductively strong. With an inductively strong argument, it just means that if the premises are true, the conclusion is probably true. So like Tom Brady has appeared in 10 Super Bowls. I don't know. I mean, this is maybe not the best because they haven't all been in a row. But I guess you could just say using induction, right? Has he made the playoffs every year of his career? That's probably true. So if you say Tom Brady's team has made the playoffs every year for 20 seasons, therefore he'll make the playoffs in 2021, this coming year. Wouldn't it seem like that's a reasonable conclusion to draw? I'm not trying to say I'm a huge fan or anything of Tom Brady, but just in terms of using it as a common example that's maybe on our mind after the weekend. Athletic performance is one source of possible inductive argument, but there are many others. The sun has come up every morning for billions of years, so it will come up tomorrow. Let's see. Cal State Fullerton has been admitting students every fall for, 70 years or something. So we will have a new group of fall students admitted in 2021. See, these are conclusions that do seem pretty probable if we think about the claim made by the premises, but we can't guarantee you these conclusions with absolute certainty, even if the premises are true, unlike in the case of a deductively valid argument. Okay, now, beyond that, the last lecture focused our mind on what are 4 different forms of deductively valid argument. So with maybe some of your guys' support, I'd like to go back into that just quickly, and then we'll move on to the chapter 1 notes. So who can tell me the name of one of the types of deductively valid argument that we learned about on Wednesday? Since we studied 4, who can help me just get started with one of those 4? So let me know the name of one of the types of deductively valid argument. Let's see what you've got. Okay, well, Brenda, one issue with the name that you wrote, maybe you'll notice it, or maybe it will be corrected by another. So modus ponens is not the name of any of the types of argument. Let's be clear about that because it's an error that sometimes gets made. what you wrote is a combination between ponens and tollens, but it's not. It's one or the other. So it's like mixing the two words together. Modus ponens is one, modus tollens is another. Now, Danny, what you wrote, hypothetical syllogism. Hypothetical syllogism is the name of the family of different types of deductively valid argument, but it's a type rather than a particular individual. So of the hypothetical syllogisms, there are three: modus ponens, modus tollens, and the chain argument. So let's go ahead and just go over those three for the moment. These are three different types of hypothetical syllogism. Let's then talk about, so three hypothetical syllogisms. That's the header for the moment as we review this. Okay, so one of them, modus ponens. Okay, let me ask this question. What is a hypothetical statement? What type of sentence is a hypothetical, or it's sometimes called a conditional? Let me know. Let's just get that piece of info back on the table. A hypothetical, because these are hypothetical syllogisms, so jumping off from there, what is a hypothetical? It's a thing. What is it? Correct. It is an if-then sentence. That's right, Chelsea. You should say it in a more fulsome way, though, because just writing if-then is not a perfect sentence. A hypothetical syllogism is an if-then sentence. Okay, so, for example, if A, then B. This is the form that a hypothetical takes. It's an if-then statement. And there are two parts to every hypothetical. Tell me what is the name of the if part? The part which says if A. What's the name of that? Yes, good, Amanda, and others. It's the antecedent. So the antecedent of the conditional is what we call the if part. And what is the name of the then part? Okay, good, Dimitri, you've said, well, and the consequent, but I mean, that would have been a response to two questions. The consequent is the then part. It's the then clause. So this is the antecedent, that's the consequent. Okay, now, modus ponens. The first premise of modus ponens says if A, then B. Tell me how it goes from there, anybody. What's the second premise and then the conclusion of the modus ponens argument? Just filling in these blank spaces here. So we've started with if A, then B, and that proceeds to the second premise, which says what? Okay, very good, guys. A. So what's the conclusion from those two statements, which say if A, then B, and also A? So therefore, we can conclude that what? If A, then B, A, therefore B. That's right, Brenda, yes. So this is the overall presentation of modus ponens arguments. Now, when you have a modus ponens argument, it's going to have content which fills in the place of A and B, and that could be just anything. If I stay up late, then I will miss my morning class. I stayed up late. Therefore, I missed my morning class, just as an example. Okay, so modus ponens. Maybe you remember that modus ponens is also called by a separate name at times. Does anyone have a memory of that? We sometimes refer to it as AKA what? Modus ponens slash, what's the other name? Yes, good, Kenya. Affirming the antecedent. And it has this name additional to modus ponens because of the way that the argument goes. It goes by stating a hypothetical and then affirming the antecedent. That's the second premise, affirming the antecedent. Then from there, the consequent is the conclusion. So that's modus ponens. Let's continue though, and just review all these different types of hypothetical syllogism. So now I'm going to go over the next one. Let's say not modus ponens, but rather modus tollens. So modus tollens, another deductively valid argument form, beginning with if A then B, and then continuing from there in its own different direction. What's the second premise of the modus tollens, if anyone knows? So we begin in the same way with a conditional on the first premise. And then what's the next second premise of the modus tollens style argument? Okay, that's good, Dimitri and Amanda and Brenda and others. It's not B is the second premise, which implies what? If we know that if A, then B, and also not B, then we can therefore conclude that what? Conclusion. Not A. Very good, yes. Okay, so like if I have a hangover, then I drank alcohol, but I didn't drink alcohol, so I don't have a hangover. Just one example of modus tollens. If I stay up too late, then I will miss my morning class. I did not miss my morning class, so I didn't stay up too late. If I run, then I'll sweat. I'm not sweating, so I guess I didn't run. And that's just a various number of random examples of modus tollens. Now, who knows or remembers the second name of modus tollens? It's AKA / what? Modus tollens, also known as the what? Or also known as, I'll just wait for it for 1 second. Thanks, Chelsea. Denying the consequent. Okay. Denying the consequent, and it is called this because of the second premise, which does deny the consequent of the first hypothetical. So, you know, when you know that some event or prior cause would lead to some result, and the result has not occurred, then that allows you to conclude that the antecedent event also didn't occur, because had it done so, we would have had B, but we don't have B, so therefore there was no A. So if it rains, then my car gets wet. My car is not wet, so there was no rain, if I have an outdoor parking spot, for example. You know, so just thinking through it logically, this makes perfectly good sense. That's denying the consequent. One more hypothetical syllogism, and I saw some of you guys mention it, and that's the chain argument. Okay, so chain argument, as with all hypothetical syllogisms, it does have a if-then, if A then B, for example. But it proceeds a little differently from either modus ponens or modus tollens. So if it's chain argument, what do you think would be the second premise of this argument here, which starts with the initial statement that if A then B? From there, how would we continue going through to the next premise? So let's figure that one out. Okay, if A then B, followed by if B then C, yes. Now, with chain argument, it's possible to have additional premises, but let's suppose that this argument merely has two. If A then B, if B then C, okay. I see you, Dylan, no worries. So what is the conclusion then of this argument in this example? Following it from the first premise down to the conclusion, if A then B, and if B then C. And so therefore, what? If A then C, very good, Danny. Okay, so let's see, if I oversleep, then I will miss the bus, and if I miss the bus, then I will miss class. So if I oversleep, then I will miss class. The chain argument is kind of like a chain reaction, if you like, because it says that one thing leads to something else, and that event, in turn, leads to yet a further consequence. So, of course, if this is both true, then whenever the first thing happens, by means of this link of chain reaction events, C will ultimately occur as well. Okay, so that's a chain argument. And these are three types of hypothetical syllogism. But let's go over one more form of deductively valid argument. What was the other one, guys? Anyone can tell me. So I'm not talking about modus ponens, modus tollens, or chain argument. What is the fourth one in this mix? Just the name, and then we'll get into details of what it is. So besides the three hypothetical arguments, we do, yes, disjunctive syllogism. Disjunctive syllogism takes its name from the type of sentence called a disjunction. Okay, good. And who remembers this piece of info? What is a disjunction sentence? A hypothetical is an if-then sentence. A disjunction is a different type of sentence. Which kind? If it's a disjunction, in other words, we're speaking of a what type of sentence? Just asking what kind of sentence that one is. Okay, very good. Yes, Dylan, it's an either-or sentence. And to the rest, correct. So that's what it is, an either-or sentence. Okay, so the disjunctive syllogism takes this general format. Or who can tell me? So first premise, we'll say a disjunction. So we'll say either A or B. Okay, and then what's the second premise going to say of a disjunctive syllogism? As given in this example here. So from either A or B, we move to the next statement, which will say what? Okay, good, not A. And therefore, we're left with what conclusion in the end then? So starting with either A or B, eliminating A, leads us to the logical result that what? That's right, B. Therefore, B. Okay, yeah, so that's a disjunctive syllogism. Maybe someone remembers the alternative name that it has, and its other name that it can be identified with is the argument from elimination. So I'll write that here. Okay, disjunctive syllogism / argument from elimination. It involves a disjunction statement, which is an either or sentence in the first premise. And this is the overall layout. Either A or B, not A, and so therefore B. Alternatively, with the disjunctive syllogism, it's permissible to eliminate the other disjunct, the one on the right. If it was either A or B, not B, then we would be left with the conclusion A. And so infinitely many examples can be placed into this structure. Either the Chiefs or the Buccaneers will win the Super Bowl, and the Chiefs did not win, so the Tampa Bay is the champion. That's just one example, right? You have two cases, it's one or the other. If we rule one out or eliminate one, then given the fact that one or the other would be the case, it is the other one, okay? So disjunctive syllogism. All right, that was just a little bit of review. Keep those things in mind. The hypothetical syllogisms are in play for the homework assignment that you're all going to be submitting, or if you haven't yet, it's due on Wednesday. So waiting for those if I haven't received them, but not to worry, there's no rush. You can turn them in anytime by email up till class time on Wednesday. For those that have submitted, I send a confirmation email to each received assignment. Okay, so that's just review from last lecture. Now we're going to move on, and we're not going to forget these things. They're going to stay with us, but we are going to add some new knowledge from here. Okay, guys, so we're starting off to the chapter 1 notes now from our textbook. And chapter 1 of the book opens the whole course with, well, the book. I mean, we open the course in a slightly different order because I wanted to teach you guys about argument first. But they just start off with some general discussion about how important it is in life to be a good critical thinker. The kind of person that can analyze arguments and provide arguments when necessary to justify and back up your own viewpoints. Being a good critical thinker, along with all the other benefits that it carries with it, it can also help to prevent you from uncritically accepting orders or following unjust or even illegal, immoral orders. So the example is mentioned of Nazi Germany, and you guys know that during Nazi Germany, atrocities were committed. Jewish people were exterminated, and many of the officers that were later brought to face justice in the Nuremberg trials would profess their innocence by making a very classic defense. Maybe some of you guys have ever heard this in your history classes, or you just have it from general knowledge. But many of the Nazi officers, when faced with accountability for their crimes, made what kind of defense? Do you know what they would plead or say? It's a sort of famous line that resonates through the generations. Many of these Nazi officers said, "Don't hold me accountable. Please don't execute me because I was just what?" Have you heard this line before? Let's hear if anyone even thinks they know what I'm referring to. The classic defense of people like Adolf Eichmann held accountable in the Nuremberg trials. They said, "Don't hold me accountable, excuse my actions, because I was just following orders." That's right, Harry and Dimitri and Yvonne, just following orders. And that was what many did say. They said, "Please don't find me at fault. I was merely one little officer in a much larger system, just doing my official duties, and the orders came from up above me. So if anyone's morally responsible, it's not me, it's the higher ups that issued these orders." But that was not a legitimate moral or legal defense. And these people were hanged, in the Nuremberg trials. So this reminds us that we can't just always sort of unconsciously and mindlessly follow along with what we've been told to do. We have to bring our own judgment and critical thinking to bear, because we don't want to find ourselves in a position ever in life where we just said, someone told me to do it, I didn't think about it, whether it was right or wrong, moral or immoral, legal or illegal, and therefore I just followed the order. I mean, even in the military, where we have a very heavy emphasis on fidelity to the chain of command, you're trained and you're instructed very early on not to obey an illegal order. So not every order carries force. If it crosses legal or moral lines, then your own judgment should be able to invalidate the legitimacy of the order. So the textbook mentions that, and in the generation that followed World War II, some psychologists and social scientists were interested in researching this question. To what degree do human beings just generally have a tendency to just go along with what they're told to do? If you feel like this is an authoritative command coming from someone who wields some kind of authority, do most people just mindlessly obey, or do more people have a tendency to stop and think and refuse to obey if they judge that what they're being told to do is wrong? So this question became an interesting question for researchers, and some famous social psychology experiments were developed which helped to shed a little bit of light on the tendency of human beings to be more or less obedient in the face of authoritative commands. So one famous social psychology experiment that's referred to here in the book, touching on this topic, is the experiment of researcher Stanley Milgram. And so his famous experiment has just come to be known as the Milgram experiment. So the Milgram experiment was conducted at Yale University between the years 1960 and 1963. I'll tell you a little bit more about the details, but maybe I would like to ask this. Have any of you guys ever heard about the Milgram experiment? It's sometimes a subject that is instructed to you in psychology courses and social science courses sometimes. Sometimes people have just caught wind of it through general knowledge. So I wonder, have any of you ever heard of the Milgram study? If so, does anybody know about its basic parameters, what happened in the study? Let me just see, just getting a sense of whether this is common knowledge to any of you guys or not. If you don't know about it, let me know that. If you do, then let me know maybe you've heard about it or something like that. Milgram, anybody? Yes, Brenda? Okay. So you've got some exposure to the experiment in the past, at least one. Yvonne, no. Okay, good to know that. So I figure it's kind of a mixed bag. All right, well, here, let me help all those never heard of it learn a little bit about it. So the Milgram experiment, it's set up at Yale University between 60 and 63. here's what people were told that were involved in the study. So an advertisement was put out, and it recruits volunteers to volunteer to become subjects of the study. And it says to them, here's what we are doing. We want to learn about the effect of punishment on memory and learning. We don't know whether punishing somebody for getting an answer wrong or whatever will make them better at it next time. You know, will the fear of receiving the penalty or punishment make people better learners, better memorizers, or what? Or will it have no effect, or will it have a negative effect? So they said, bring, you know, volunteer and come in, and we'll set you up in this study. So people come in to participate, and they have two people. And they say, one of you guys is going to be put into the role of learner, and the other is going to be put into the role of teacher. Now, in fact, so they had them draw a piece of paper out of a hat, and the piece of paper is going to say one of those two roles on it, teacher or learner. Now, here's the thing. The drawing was rigged. The drawing was rigged so that both of the pieces of paper said teacher. But the one member of the two volunteer setup has already been coached previously by the researcher to act like their strip of paper says learner. So this induces in the one who receives the other paper that says teacher, it induces in them this illusion that the drawing was legitimate and they had a 50-50 chance of becoming the learner. In fact, though, the learner has been given prior instructions by the research team, and so this is a little bit of a ruse. Anyway, now having their two roles, teacher and learner, they place the learner behind a wall in a separate room, and they attach like electrodes to this learner. And they say this in the presence of the teacher and the learner. The researcher, Milgram, he says, so you're going to be given a set of word pairs to the learner. I want you to look at this set of word pairs, and they're just random pairings of words like dog, house, neck, balloon, you know, just random pairings of words, but they're trying to remember the pairing. And after they get a little bit of time with the list is removed away from them, and then they say, okay, what we're going to do is the learner is going to be put on the one side, and the teacher is going to be on the opposite side of this wall. The teacher over here is going to basically just ask you through the wall about one of the two words in the word pair. And then he's going to give you a multiple choice set of like 4 possible words that were originally paired with that one. So imagine that the original word pairing was like boy, car. Then he'd say, okay, first word is boy. And the learner hears that, and then he says, okay, now the second word is either dog, car, island, or lamp. And so then he would say, now which word matched originally with boy? And so the learner now is supposed to try and remember what the correct pairing was. Now, if he gets the right response and he gives that as his answer, then that's good. But if he gets the wrong pairing, then he was supposed to be hit with a shock. So the teacher is the one on the other side of the wall with this shock generator machine. And they told him every time the learner gets an answer wrong, switch this shock voltage button, and he's going to be delivered with a punishment shock of a certain voltage. And with each additional wrong answer that he gives, we want you to go up the voltage scale and increase the intensity of these shocks. So, you know, like if he gets 1 wrong answer, he's got a little shock. 2 wrong answers, it's a little bit worse shock, and on and on and on up a voltage scale. And that was clearly set out on the machine with numbers of volts for each switch. Okay, now there's a couple of little plot twists. So far, hopefully you're following me with the basic premise of the experiment. They said, we're trying to see how well punishment affects memory and learning. One of you's trying to remember word pairs. You've got electrodes on. You're on one side of a wall. The other one's the so-called teacher. You give them the prompt of which word to remember the other corresponding word of. And if they get the wrong answer, hit the switch and continue through until they get all the answers right, going up in intensity with each additional wrong answer. Now, here's a little plot twist, okay? In fact, in reality, there were no shocks, okay? So this was all a big kind of illusion, but the teacher didn't know that. The teacher thought this person is really receiving legitimate physical, painful shocks every time I hit one of these switches. And the learner was coached to cry out in pain, you know, whenever the administration of the shock would be delivered. So they're over here acting as though they're in serious pain when they get these shocks. And at a certain point, when it gets to a certain intensity, the learner starts saying things like, I refuse to continue. This is wrong. I'm being hurt too much by these shocks. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. You got to stop shocking me. I refuse to keep going. And then the teacher, who's with the researcher on the other side of the wall was put in a tough position. Should I continue to deliver the shocks? Because the researcher says that's part of the study's design and I have to keep giving them. But I have a human being on the other side of the wall screaming out in pain, telling me that they've got a heart condition and that they don't think they can handle these shocks. So, you know, to put the teacher in a tough position, it's like, should I keep giving the shocks or should I stop? This person's clearly in pain. Am I doing something wrong? In the midst of their confusion and tough decision, the researcher is trying to impel them to keep doing the shocks. So he says, don't worry, the shocks, I know it hurts the person, but they're not getting any kind of permanent damage or something. So he's trying to like reassure the teacher to keep going. The real question then is this: were these guys studying the effect of punishment on learning and memory? No, because there was no actual punishment. So let me ask anybody who's heard the rundown of the study so far, give me your sense of what was the real question being studied here? What were we trying to learn or investigate? Since it had nothing to do with real punishment, since the punishment was fake, what was the actual question that we were trying to learn an answer to in this study? If you could guess, what do you think was really being learned about or investigated in the Milgram experiment? Brenda, you say, it really surprised me how many teachers continue to shock the student after many of the students refuse to continue. I remember watching a video of this experiment in psych class. Yes, it is quite surprising. I was going to say shocking, but I guess this is too much of a humorous pun. But yeah, it's a bit of a surprise to see how willing many people are to give the shocks. And I'm going to get to that point about the ultimate results, what ratio or proportion of people gave all the shocks versus not. I'm also going to send you guys as a sort of supplemental thing for the class some videos like what you're talking about, Brenda, which shows the actual archived footage from the original experiments. It's very fascinating to watch. But correct, Diego, you say a test of morals versus orders. That's one way to put it. Let me see, Margarito. You say the mind of like Nazi soldiers, how people think when they get orders, how far will they go? Yeah, except it's not just the Nazi soldiers, right? It's like everyday people. How much of a tendency do people have to follow orders, even when the orders coming from somebody are evidently wrong, immoral, and deviant? And it did show that most people did deliver all of the shocks. So that's kind of the disappointing outcome. Previous to the experiment being conducted, psychologists were paneled and surveyed. How many people out of 100 do you think will give all the shocks? And they estimated that it would be a very tiny number, less than 10% at most. In fact, though, fully 2/3 of people gave all of the shocks. So that's the majority of people. And it's a disappointing outcome because you would have hoped that many, their morality and common sense and critical thinking would have kicked in at a certain point along the process. And they would have said, I'm sorry, I cannot in good conscience continue because despite the needs of the experiment, this person is clearly being hurt. Let me see some other comments here. Avani, will people continue to cause pain to someone or do something morally wrong just because they're told to? Yes. It is morally wrong, though. I don't know if we need the scare quotes. I mean, it's clearly wrong to hurt a person against their will when they protest in pain. And then Danny, after hearing your explanation about the experiment, I think it was a test about the teacher's morals on the student. Yeah, well, it was a test to see whether or not the person would mindlessly obey orders or would they defer to their own sense of morality, right and wrong. Obedience to an authority, yes, Ashley, it is. It's studying the degree to which everyday people are obedient even when the orders that they are given are questionable and immoral. Say they were unable to provide logical counter-arguments to the scientists' insistence. Yes, that's also true, and that's mentioned in the book. So let me kind of bring all these comments together. So the people, as I remind you, they were told the purpose of the study was to see the effects of punishment on learning, that they would give shocks as punishment for wrong answers with increasing intensity for each new wrong answer. The actor, on the other hand, would scream louder as the false shocks became more severe, and their protests and demands to be set free would become more urgent and vocal. And in the end, all participants did deliver shocks up to the 300-volt range before refusing, and as much as 65%, or roughly 2/3, went all the way to the 450 maximum voltage, just because the authority told them to do it, and against the protests of the person being presumably harmed. Now, there's a healthy minority, though, of people that did refuse to continue giving the shocks, around 35% or so a little more than 1/3. And if you look at the archive footage, it's fascinating to see that the people who were able to resist the orders of the experimenter were the kind of people that could give logical counter-arguments as to why they should continue. So the better critical thinkers, essentially, were the ones that were in that 1/3 category that refused to continue with the shocks. They would start asking critical questions like, how do you know that this person is not being harmed, given the fact that they're crying so much and protesting so much? Is it really right to continue to impose this punishment on someone now that they're saying that it's involuntary against them? And so the kind of subjects in the study that would ask pointed questions about the necessity and the morality of continuing to go on, those were the ones that most often would break off and refuse at a certain point. The ones that gave all the shocks, though, didn't seem as well capable of stating rational reasons as to their refusal. In many cases, they showed discomfort. There were signs of anxiety, like hesitation, like, oh man, am I really going to give another shock? But they oftentimes were not capable of stating in a logical and reasonable way why they should stop. And so they just followed along and followed orders. So the lesson that we get from the ultimate conclusions of the study is that people in general do have a tendency to mindlessly obey orders if they perceive that they have social support for those orders or that they're coming from some kind of perceived authority figure. The good critical thinkers that we're trying to be, though, would be a little bit more skeptical of authority than that and a little bit more willing to question whether they're being told to do the right thing. So we want to be a little bit more like those that were capable of stating their reasons for refusal and doing the right thing, defying the authority here. Being a good critical thinker gives you the intellectual tools that you need to defy authority if and when it's appropriate. And this is not to go off on the other extreme and say that authority never wields any kind of justification or that you should always just rebel against it. But if and when you're in a position to make a choice about whether an authoritative command is legitimate or morally justified, a good critical thinker would reason about it instead of just mindlessly following along. Now, another famous social psychology experiment that's also mentioned at the top of chapter 1, so I'm going over it as well, is the Zimbardo experiment, or the Zimbardo study, as some call it. Now, this was supervised by researcher and psychologist Philip Zimbardo, so that's the namesake of it. And this all happened at Stanford University in 1971. Okay, it was funded actually by the United States Navy. And what they were trying to learn about was how people will respond when they're put in a social situation where some people have like no control and other people have total control over them. Has anybody ever heard of the Zimbardo experiment? This one I think is perhaps a little more well known in the pop culture. There was a movie made about it not too many years ago in the 2010s. Yes, there was that movie, Brenda. But does anyone catch the reference to Zimbardo or know the even basic details about what happened in this study? If so, let me hear your brief recollection, if you have one. If you could even say like a sentence or two, what happened in the study, etc. Let me know. I can see that some of you know about it, but what do you know about it? You've heard that it's the what type of study that did what, or that what happened in it. Your first time hearing it, not to worry, Danny, I'll fill you right in, but just checking with some of the others in case there's any understanding I can work off of. Volunteers were assigned a role, prisoner and guard. Yes, prisoners and guards. So you guys got it. This is basically sometimes known as the famous Stanford prison experiment. That's another that from your memory if you have it. So let me give you the full details then. Stanford University in 1971, Philip Zimbardo is a psychology professor and a researcher there. He gets a grant of funding from the US Navy to conduct this experiment, and they just wanted to see how people would respond when they were put in a simulated prison environment where some people were designated in the role of guards and other volunteers were designated in the role of prisoners. So they recruited college student volunteers from the Stanford area to participate. And when they came to the psychology department of Stanford, they were assigned one of those two roles, prisoner or guard. And they basically said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to run a simulated mock prison environment for 2 weeks in the basement of the Stanford psychology department. So to those that were college students given the role of prisoner, they were supposed to, occupy the prison and they would be ordered around by the guards. Those that were placed in the role of prison guard, they were given very loose oversight. They were told, you can't harm them in a way that would cause permanent physical damage, but aside from that, you can do whatever you find necessary to establish order at the mock prison. So they were kind of given loose oversight and broad latitude as to how to conduct themselves. The main premise was just run the prison, whatever that means to you. Run the prison, keep order, and as long as you don't cause like permanent damage to the people, we'll give you pretty broad discretion as to how you're going to execute that mission. So it was supposed to go for 2 weeks, prison simulation, but it actually had to be canceled after just 6 days. So it was canceled prematurely. Why? Because it didn't take very long before it started to spin out of control. The prison guards started to take their role so seriously and get so wrapped up in executing the authority they thought they had in a simulation that they started to act abusively and really cruel and harsh towards the inmates. So they were like verbally abusing them, forcing them to sexually humiliate themselves, like forced like mock weddings between different male subjects, trying to play on like homophobic type of stereotypes and things like that, making people clean the ground with their bare hands and eat things that had been fallen on the ground, cleaning toilets with bare hands, and putting people into forced confinement, solitary confinement just for minor verbal retaliation against the oversight of the guards. So they really got carried away with their roles, these so-called prison guards. And it started to cause some of the prisoners to have mental breakdown. One guy had to be let go after a few days because he was having a full mental breakdown. And this was starting to happen with other of the people in this scenario as well. So a graduate student working with Zimbardo came to him and said, I think you have to cancel this study. You're starting to actually cause permanent psychological damage to the test subjects. And he thought about it and he recognized that that was true. The environment became too real. Everyone got too invested in their roles. And so it had to be shut down. But once again, it kind of shows us that many of us will uncritically follow a tendency we have to act in a way that deviates from good moral and rational judgment, as long as we think we have social support for it, and as long as we feel that we are conducting this under the auspices of some kind of authority figure. So whether it's in the Milgram study or the Zimbardo study, what we would have liked is to have had more good critical thinkers in these groups where the person was either in the role of teacher or in the role of prison guard. Good critical thinking stands in the way of you devolving into the lower base nature of human behavior and thinking, at least for a moment, about what you're doing, why you're doing it, whether it's good, bad, right or wrong, wise or unwise. So here I'll read from the text a little bit, and you'll see their description and basic summary of this. So first about Milgram. It says, Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann was tried in Israel in 1960 for crimes against humanity. Despite his claim that he was just following the orders of his superiors when he ordered the deaths of millions of Jews, the court found him guilty and sentenced him to death. Was he a monster, or was he, as his lawyer claimed, just following orders? To address this question, social psychologist Stanley Milgram of Yale conducted, between 1960 and 1963, what became a classic experiment. Milgram placed an advertisement in a newspaper asking for men to take part in a scientific study of memory and learning. Those chosen to participate were told that the purpose of the experiment was to study the effects of punishment on learning, and that their job was to give electric shocks as punishment when a learner gave a wrong given at the experimenter and would range in intensity from 15 to 450 volts. In fact, no shocks were really given, but the participant didn't know that. At least the teacher didn't know that. As the intensity of shocks increased, the learner, who was actually acting, responded with increasing anguish, screaming in pain, pleading with the participant delivering the shocks to stop. It's quite striking. When you see the video, which I'll, of course, share some video recordings of the old experiment to the class, they describe the learner as a former U.S. veteran who has a heart condition, and he says that in advance. He's like, I know I'm going to get these shocks, but I kind of have a heart condition. They found that at the Veterans Hospital because I'm a U.S. veteran, and so I feel like that actually adds another layer of like how bad it was for the teacher to just continue going on, because he's shocking a U.S. veteran who's told him before, I have a heart problem. But anyway, despite the repeated pleas, all the participants did give shocks of up to 300 volts before refusing, and in addition, 2/3 continued to deliver shocks all the way to 450 volts, just because the authority figure researcher told them to continue. Most that continued were disturbed, but however, unlike the participants that did refuse, they were not able to provide logical counter-arguments to the scientists' insistence. Okay, and so Another study along similar lines in 1971, the U.S. Navy funded a study of reaction of humans to situations where there are huge differences in authority and power, like in a prison. The study was administered under the direction of psychologist Philip Zimbardo, who selected volunteers judged to be psychologically stable and healthy. Just an important side note. He made sure that these were people with no prior history of mental illness or violence or any kind of criminal record. So you can't just say, oh, well, these are the worst of the worst people, and that's why they acted like that. No, these are just everyday people, could be any of us. The volunteers were randomly assigned to play the role of either guard or prisoner in the 2-week prison simulation at Stanford University's basement of the psychology department. To make the situation more realistic, guards were given wooden batons and they wore khaki military-style uniforms. So putting them in uniform helped to further enhance this effect of feeling like you're in a social role. And the prisoners were given ill-fitting smocks with no underwear and rubber thongs for their feet. So that kind of served to degrade them a little bit, and the uniformity of their kind of shabby prison outfit made them have a different social status. The guards were not given any formal instructions. Each prisoner was given a number to be used instead of a name. That also dehumanized them a little more. You watch the video of it and you'll see they're like, number 7, what are you doing? Number 7, get down. Like, not even humanizing them by referring to them by their birth name. The guards were not given any formal instructions, simply told to run the prison, and it quickly got out of control. Prisoners were subjected to abusive, humiliating treatment, physical and emotional, by the guards. 1/3 of the guards became increasingly cruel, especially at night when they thought the cameras were off. Prisoners were forced to clean toilets with their bare hands, sleep on the concrete floor, endure solitary confinement, hunger, subjected to forced nudity, sexual abuse, much like what has happened in some actual prison systems, including at some overseas prisons that we staff in fighting U.S. wars, like in Iraq and Afghanistan. There was the Abu Ghraib prison scandal in Iraq that bears significant similarities to the simulation that happened here, albeit more intense and extreme because those are real prisoners. So it's kind of a reminder to us that we have to bring good critical thinking to bear on our decision-making, judgment, and behavior in everyday life. So it kind of highlights and underscores, again, the value of these intellectual tools that we're trying to develop in the class. You don't want to be the kind of person who basically mindlessly follows orders, often to your own detriment, because it's not a justifiable excuse to say that I just followed an illegal or immoral order. Okay, so that's just a little primary lesson as we begin chapter 1, going over some of those famous social psychology experiments and the import that they have for the subject of our class. And like I say, I'm going to mail you guys some interesting videos. There's a couple that I have in mind that kind of just survey and show you some of the classic footage. Okay, so now continuing with chapter 1 and the notes there. We want to be good critical thinkers in this class, so we want to kind of develop cognitively. Cognitive development is the lifelong process of acquiring intelligence and problem-solving ability. So let me give you that little vocabulary term. Okay, cognitive development. It's a lifelong process, so the development and your ability to reason over the course of your life, that's what we're talking about. It's a lifelong process because there's no upper boundary in terms of how much you can learn in your life, and it doesn't necessarily end with the end of your formal education either. I mean, I took my education, I guess, as far as you can take it in our system, all the way through to the PhD, and I feel like I still learn new things almost every day, every week, every month. So there's really no limit, I guess, except for, I mean, death, injury, cognitive disability, or like stuff like that. You know, aside from these external factors, in the ordinary course of events, you can always develop more ability to like learn, think through problems, and reason. So cognitive development is a lifelong process, and it's been studied by some researchers. We're going to now talk about William Perry Jr., an education researcher who believed that cognitive development develops in 3 specific phases over the course of your life. So that's the general concept of cognitive development. Now let me tell you guys about the 3 stages of it according to William Perry Jr. So this is the researcher I'm talking about. Okay, William Perry Jr. and the 3 stages of cognitive development. So 3 stages of cognitive development. Okay, so they proceed from the first stage, which is dualism, then relativism, finally the highest stage, commitment. Dualism, relativism, and commitment. Starting off with dualism. Okay, so dualism is the first and most basic phase of your cognitive intellectual development in life. You have to think of the mental outlook and thinking of young people, children, relatively unsophisticated adults, I guess, but definitely young children. And it's characterized by this definition. So it's thinking of truth as just all being black and white, that there's no ambiguity, no gray area. All the facts are already known and understood. So they think of truth as just black and white, and that authority figures are the ones who know everything. So all truth is black and white, and authority figures know the answers to every question. Okay, dualism. Dualism, the word is playing on the duality of black and white and how it's just these two kind of polar opposites. So with dualistic thinking in your cognitive development, the early stage, you think that fact and truth is unambiguous and clear. And authority figures on high are the ones that know everything. And I'm just sort of supposed to listen to them, defer to them, let them fill my head up with information, but I have nothing to contribute or give input of my own. So the person in the dualist phase doesn't think that they're really making their own judgments or distinctions, rather that smart authority figures, whether that's parents, teachers, trusted members of the community, these people know everything. I should just listen, and I'm just kind of like a receptacle of information that flows down from above. I don't question those people. I place absolute trust in what they say. They know everything, and their knowledge is just black and white truth. Okay, so that's dualism. When you're a very young child, for example, you think and live this way, and it makes sense because when you're that young, you don't have the experience to make a lot of careful and complex decisions on your own. You simply hear the received wisdom that come from your teachers, parents, and others, and you just trust it and you place absolute confidence in that. But as you learn and you live and you experience a little more, you eventually arrive at the second stage of your cognitive development, and that's relativism. But just to kind of cap this off, when you're in the dualist stage, you have a hard time with the concept of ambiguity and conflicting viewpoints. You don't know how to like weigh one argument against another because you just think that all the facts are out there, so just someone tell me what the facts are. It's hard for you to make judgments and do analysis because you don't think of yourself as a competent judge, just a receiver of information. Finally, though, you get to the relativist phase, if you do, and at the relativist phase, it's like a big backlash to dualism. Now you think that truth is completely just subjective, and so at this point you think that truth is all just a matter of opinion, truth is all just personal opinion, and since all opinions are equal, we shouldn't judge any of them. So that's the relativist stage. All truth is just opinion, it's just personal opinion. And to add to that, all opinions are equal and should not be judged. Relativism. The word relativism is to indicate that they think truth is relative. There's like no absolute facts. That relative to me, one thing may be true, relative to you, it may be false. And we're kind of both correct because there's no absolute objective truth. There's just opinions all around. So the relativist is no longer thinking that truth is objective and black and white. They think, no, it's all just opinion-based. And if it is based on opinions, we should just treat everyone's opinions as equal. No opinion more valid or less than any other. I find that a lot of people, you know, in the kind of adolescent and young adult age group are in the relativist way of thinking, because it's not wrong in a way to think that everyone has a valid opinion. We should be respectful of diversity, tolerant of different lifestyles, belief systems, etc. That's all very fair and good. But the problem with relativism is that the person who's thinking this way no longer even believes that there is objective truth to be found. You know, so they kind of don't believe there's any value to pursuing objective truth. And that's why there's still one level that goes beyond this. So at the commitment stage, which is the highest level of intellectual and cognitive development that maybe not everyone does fully get to, at least according to William Perry Jr., at this stage, people start to commit to their own views based on reason and the best available evidence. So that kind of takes the best aspects of both of these and goes beyond them. Unlike the relativist, they do think that there's facts and there's truth that's objective. But unlike the dualist, they don't just think they should defer to everybody else to find out what they are. Now you think you're a worthy and competent judge of what those facts are, and so you commit to your own views based on your judgment. So let me actually put the definition up here because I need a little more room. But just know that it's the third stage, commitment. So like 1, 2, up here is 3, commitment stage of cognitive development. So that's just when one commits to their own views. Based on reason and the best available evidence. Okay, so the dualist just thinks, I don't know anything, everybody else fill my head with information that's coming from somewhere else. They place absolute trust and confidence in it and think it's absolutely correct. When you get to relativism, you're thinking, well, absolute truth and objective truth, maybe that doesn't exist. Maybe there's just opinions that we all have, and we should all kind of be fair-minded about the equal value and validity of each person's opinion. Commitment, though, starts to recognize that there really are truths. There are certain views, even if everyone has their own opinion, they're not all equally justified. So they recognize that there's a pursuit of objective truth that we can engage with. So they commit to their own views, which they think are really true. But they don't merely do that by means of listening to others. One is the independent judge of what's true and false, and they simply use these two main sources, their reason and the evidence that's out there. So this is kind of like a description of the process of cognitive development that happens in a person's everyday life. Let me read here from the book, and you can see what it says about the same point. Becoming a critical thinker is a lifelong process. Education researcher William Perry Jr., who lived from 1913 to 1998, he was one of the first to study the college students' cognitive development. Cognitive development, the process by which each of us becomes more intelligent, acquiring intelligence and advanced thought from infancy to adulthood. Clearly, we do develop intellectually. You know, you're coming out of the womb, you don't even know how to talk, you don't know anything about the reality that you're part of. Now we're all adults, and you have a much more developed mind and understanding, but that continues. He says, Perry's work has gained wide acceptance among educators. Although Perry identified 9 positions, later researchers simplify them into 3: dualism, relativism, commitment. Dualism. Younger students tend to take in knowledge and life experiences in a simplistic, dualistic way, viewing something as either right or wrong. They see knowledge as existing outside themselves and look to authority figures for answers. Relativism. Rather than accepting that ambiguity and uncertainty may be unavoidable and that they need to make decisions despite that, students at the relativist stage go to the opposite extreme. They reject dualistic worldview and instead believe that all truth is relative or just a matter of opinion. People at this stage believe that stating your opinion is the best way to express yourself, and they look down on challenging others' opinions as judgmental or even disrespectful. The belief that all truth is relative can also lead to mental paralysis. Like, if everything's relative, then why care about anything, right? Because there would be no facts that you could feel like you're defending in any objective sense. Okay, finally, commitment. As students mature, they come to realize that not all thinking is equally valid. Not only can authorities be mistaken, but also in some circumstances, uncertainty and ambiguity are unavoidable. When students at this stage experience uncertainty, they're now able to make decisions and commit to particular positions on the basis of reason and the best available evidence. At the same time, as independent thinkers, they're open to challenge, remain flexible in their thinking, and remain willing to change their position if new evidence comes to light. So, just a little bit of a description and discussion of some of the important concepts in the early part of our Chapter 1 notes. The 3 stages of cognitive development, what they're all about, the researcher that describes those, and some related discussions. So that's enough on the levels of cognitive development. The next thing that is discussed in Chapter 1 are what are the different qualities or characteristics of a good critical thinker. So we're trying to make progress towards being better critical thinkers. If we want to do that, then we would like to know a basic description of what kind of person a good critical thinker is, so we know the target we're pretty much aiming at. And so the textbook helps us to learn that overall characterization by offering a set of characteristics or criteria of a good critical thinker. So let me put that here. Characteristics or qualities of a good critical thinker. So if you want to be this type of good critical thinker, you would want to try and build up or at least emulate some of these qualities in your own person. Characteristics of a good critical thinker. Okay, so one of them is analytical skills. And this is broadly described as the ability to provide logical support for your beliefs and opinions instead of having just baseless, unfounded opinions. So, okay, analytical skills. If you're a good critical thinker and somebody asks you, why do you think that? Why is that your opinion? A good critical thinker doesn't just shrug their shoulders and say, I kind of don't really know. I just sort of found myself thinking that. A good critical thinker can say, well, good question, and I'll tell you exactly why. Here are the reasons that I find this to be such a compelling position. And so, you know, we want to be able to back ourselves up. We want to be able to also offer reasons to others so that we make sense to people. So not only is it a tool of critical thinking that helps you win sort of social respect and esteem, but it also gives you a better sense of why you hold the positions that you do. Nobody wants to have opinions that they can't explain. If you have viewpoints and beliefs, you'd like to be able to justify them to others, but also to yourself. So this is one of the stage-setting characteristic qualities of a good critical thinker. If you're challenged to explain yourself and why you think something, a good critical thinker is not at a loss. They don't lack when that happens. They're ready to give an explanation because all their views and beliefs are based on something. Okay, now another quality that a good critical thinker would have is effective communication. Effective communication has a few just basic elements. This is the ability to listen, speak, and write effectively, but also having awareness of different communication styles. So, and awareness of different communication styles. Okay, so communication. Human beings are unique among all the animals because of the fact that we have language. Animals can make noises and they can express their emotional state of mind through their, vocalizations, if such there be, but they don't have the ability to convey specific facts and information. Like if I told you that Christopher Columbus landed in the New World in 1492, you understand what I'm saying, but no animal in the world could possibly understand even the most vague description of a fact that doesn't have something to do with their immediate surroundings, even if they could. So we're linguistic, we're rational creatures, so we have to communicate. We're communicating right now. You're hearing and I'm speaking. You're taking dictation and notes and I'm writing those notes. So we're communicating right now, and we do that all the time. That's just the life of a human being. But to be an effective communicator, there's a few things that you should be able to do well. Of course, speaking well, speaking effectively, clearly, conveying your thoughts in the spoken word, writing, right? Being able to write effectively, using the proper grammar, punctuation, word choice, diction. That shows itself in all kinds of different areas, whether it's talking to people informally, sending out emails, composing assignments for class. There's never been a person ever who was disadvantaged by being a little bit more of a careful and clear writer or a bit more expressive and precise speaker. So those are gifts that you give to yourself if you become more capable and effective in your way of communicating. Also, though, with communication, it's a two-way street. It's not just you delivering information to other people, but sometimes you're the one hearing. It's a conversation. So you have to listen carefully to what the other person is saying. That means actually paying attention to them and trying to digest their words instead of just waiting for your chance to talk, tuning them out, and then just saying nice story at the end or something, right? So a good communicator listens to the other party, takes them seriously, and when they need to offer their input, they can speak or write in a way that's clear and easy to understand. Finally, the last point is awareness of different communication styles. Different people have a tendency to communicate differently, and sometimes you'll get the most out of an exchange with someone by knowing how to adjust your communication style or knowing how to react to theirs. Some people are a little bit more in your face and extroverted with the way they communicate. Other people are a little more shy and withdrawn. So, some people are passive, some people are aggressive, some people are passive aggressive. Knowing how the other person tends to communicate can influence the approach that you want to take to the scenario that you're in. And sometimes you have to know how to modify your approach to the communicative exchange depending on the nature of what's happening, whether this is a professional setting, personal, or something in between. Okay, so good critical thinkers of the world are pretty good communicators. They can get their ideas out there, respectfully listen to others, and have a fruitful exchange of ideas. 2 qualities of a good critical thinker, but those are not the whole set. There's still more. Okay, so as we continue through the notes of chapter 1, we're just going over the big key items that fall within the characteristics of a good critical thinker. Research skills, okay. Research skills. This is just the ability to gather, evaluate, and put together evidence for the purposes of research. Okay, so if there's anything in the world that you want to know about, but you don't know about it right now, how are you going to find out about it? Well, you can't just make up the facts or come up with them from inside. You're going to have to go out into the world and seek out information, facts, etc., that pertain to that topic and become informed. That's research. Sometimes you do research for your own education and for your own knowledge, like when you're out there on the internet doing Wikipedia searches just to learn something about a topic that you find interesting or weird. Sometimes you're doing it for school, sometimes you're doing it professionally. But good critical thinkers like to be able to do good research because they want to have an established basis of reasons and evidence to stand up and support their views, whatever they may be. So a good critical thinker is able to gather the information that they need to learn about for the purposes of research. Say that today you want to learn about, I don't know, the history of a country that you don't know much about right now. Well, you're going to have to know where to go to gather all the relevant information and what reliable sources are and how to distinguish those from unreliable or poorly sourced claims. You're going to have to be able to evaluate the credibility of the pieces of information that you're doing research on. You don't want to do bad research based on unverified or poorly sourced claims. And you want to be able to then put it together in a way that's logical and well ordered so that you both have your own understanding of it and that you can present your research to other people on your behalf. So good critical thinkers are good at doing research, good at communicating, good at overall just justifying and providing reasons for their views. So we're going to kind of continue on the same course on Wednesday. We have a little bit more about what are qualities of a good critical thinker. So I haven't finished the whole list. There's still flexibility, open-minded skepticism, creative problem solving, and collaborative learning. So we're going to talk about those, and then afterwards we'll talk about what are some of the benefits of being a good critical thinker, like how does it benefit you, like what's in it for me kind of question. If I'm going to be a good critical thinker, how can I stand to benefit? We'll talk about what some of the main benefits are. And then we will also talk a little bit about what are some of the big barriers to good critical thinking. What are some of the things that stand in the way and prevent us from being better critical thinkers, or that make it harder for us to do it as well as we would like? So if by identifying the common obstacles and barriers to critical thinking, we know what they are, then we'll be better able to overcome those obstacles, counteract them, and work habits that lead us away from those kind of obstacles of good critical thinking. So we have a little more work on this. Basically, we'll try to get it all finished on Wednesday. But don't forget that your first homework is due before class time Wednesday, so you can email me that anytime, and when you do, I'll confirm your submission with a response. So is everyone good? Let me hear in the chat if you're all good to go, and then I guess I'll close today's meeting, but you can just give me any feedback, comment, hit the like button or something, just to make sure that I've not lost you guys and that we're all on the same page. So how is that? Monday the 8th. Okay, thank you so much, Danny, and to all others here. Thank you guys so much, Kenya, Brenda, Margarito, everybody else. I appreciate your attendance and attention to the class. So let's just see each other back on Wednesday. Don't forget to work through your homework, and if you had any questions, as always, just let me know. Till then, I guess, take care, and I'll see you guys in a little while. Okay, bye-bye.